Hello everybody, John here, and today on To The Garage we're doing another episode of building the perfect DIY mechanics toolkit. For those unfamiliar with the channel, my name is John and I make videos about playing around in my garage. I am not a mechanic. I am an automotive engineer, which sounds very grand, but please don't be too impressed. But my hobby is playing with cars, bikes, motorhomes in my garage. I have a huge bias, and that is the XK8 or X100 Jaguar, as we all know, is the best car in the world. But other than that, I love playing with all sorts of vehicles. And over the course of many years, I've put together the tools in my garage that I need to do practically any job. I've got some very nice tools. I've got some awful, almost embarrassing tools, and I have no need to build on a particular brand, and I have no badge snobbery involved with what I do. My tools are used regularly, but they're not used every day, and that makes a difference, I think, in what you need and what you buy and the quality of things you buy. So in a previous video we've covered everything you could possibly want to know about putting together the perfect screwdriver bit drive set for your home garage, home toolbox. But today we're going to have a little look at sockets and ratchets. Thanks to everybody who's inquired, my toolbox is an SGS stainless steel toolbox. I have done previous videos reviewing it, installing it, getting it off its pallet, etc. So you can look back at those if you'd like it. But the question I'm constantly asked is, what is that the best thing, John? This is, in my opinion, the best value for money in a toolbox that you can get if you want a large workbench style toolbox. It is not the highest of quality in that, no, it doesn't have runners that you can breathe on and they will close. And my only irritation about it, initially when I got it, it had an annoying rattle, which was to do the locking mechanism, but that's dead easy to fix. Value for money though, SGS stainless steel toolboxes, what's not to love? Nothing I've just said is due to a sponsorship deal or anybody paying me for anything. Every single thing I'm going to show you today is something I've purchased with my money, and I will say whatever I want about it, good or bad. I better turn my calendar over before we get going. As I'm filming this, we've just moved from June into July. So we're going to say bye-bye to the wonderful picture of John Palmer's Paramount Jaguar XK8 Coupe, or Coupe, as some of you keep telling me to call it. And we move to the July picture, which is Franklin Rivera's 2004 XKR Coupe, and this is taken in Como, Puerto Rico. What a picture, what a car. I just can't get beyond the reflection of all of this yellow blossom on the side of Franklin's car. It's brilliant. Anybody who wants to enter the 2023 photo competition for the 2024 calendar, you've just got about 25 days, probably by the time you watch this, to get your entries in. So I keep my sockets in 2 drawers on 1 level. There we go. It's my collection. And the first thing you'll note is they're organised, but it's not super duper pretty. Why is that? It's because sometimes super duper pretty is what I call in my profession for the tourists. Part of my actual job is I advise companies on how to be efficient and effective, and one of those, if you're into that sort of subject, is 5S or 5C. Yeah, sometimes you see companies take it to the extreme, and sometimes it's for good reason. If you've got a high-end car dealership, your tools should be arranged in beautiful ways if your customers see your workshops, because the impression it gives is very important. That has got no consequence for me. I'm showing you guys, but that's because I want to share real life. My toolbox, which is organised but not desperately pretty. And the reality of life is I will keep it this way. If I made it perfect, I probably wouldn't keep it that way, because when you're trying to get a job done, it slows you down, or to be honest, you just can't be bothered when you're frustrated and looking for the right thing. Things get thrown into whatever holes you've got. So let's take a quick overview. First of all, as I say, I'm in 2 drawers, and this is the drawer that I use. This is the and the others drawer. And what you'll note is it's not super densely packed. Temptation, I think, when you get toolboxes is to try and really package really very, very well, using up every square inch. And if you enjoy that, that's great. But you want some space to move around and to work in. And to be honest, this is still a little bit too dense for me for the area where I actually work from. I very often work with this open, because sockets, closely followed by spanners, are the things that you're going to use the most. Right hand drawer has these black sockets in it, and the black sockets generally, but not always, are used to denote that they are high impact sockets. So these are sorts of things that you can use impact guns, breaker bars on, and you won't damage. They tend to be very heavily constructed, maybe a little bulky for everyday use. They're certainly not pretty, because they don't bother with things like chrome plates, anodized finishes. It's just about strength. So I have a full set of impact sockets. So if you take a really big impact socket like this one, which is a 42, I think that was the hub nut for my Nissan L Grand, then what you might find is it comes with a bar through there, roll pin if you like, and there's a rubber ring in a groove that stops that from coming out. It's just loose in there. And that's because when you get up to this sort of size, sometimes you're using a different sort of ratchet with a different sort of drive altogether, and it doesn't have the ball detent. It will have a hole straight through the square drive, and so with this sort of socket you can slide out that little pin like so, and put your ratchet on, slide the pin through the hole, put the rubber ring back over it, and that will stop it from detaching. And the reason for that is when you're really rattling things, these fall off. Plus it's very heavy, so you turn the gun and aim down, and that comes off the end. So they've got that through pin. I have a selection of common Imperial sizes here and here. I do actually have racks to position all this, but they take up more space, and I don't want to have my Imperial sockets spread over into my main drawer. And that's one of the first things when setting your own toolbox up, is you really want to think about what sorts of vehicles you're going to work on. Now, if you're in the States, you're going to set yourself up, I'm sure, with a really good set of Imperial sockets arranged so that you can find them. Almost anywhere else in the world, we are on metric. And I'm into modern classic Jaguars, so 1990s, 2000s Jaguars, that's my particular favourite. But I'm also into Volkswagens, camper vans, etc. So German. I have Italian, I have Italian, I have Chinese. So unless you are in the States and working a lot of domestic American cars, or you're working on older British cars, so one of my friends who has a YouTube channel, Gary Mees, JagVet1, check his channel out, is rebuilding his Jaguar Mark II in the States, ironically. He needs to have lots of really good Imperial tools because everything he touches is going to be in inches and he's going to be dealing with fraction sizes, and it's wholly appropriate to have the right tools for the job. I've got those tools, but not in my main work area because I don't use them very often. I will say it is definitely false economy to go for one set, i.e. I'll get the Imperial tools because almost every size there is an equivalent in metric. However, with a couple of exceptions, the equivalents are not the same. So I know that I can pick up a 1/2 inch open-ended spanner or a 1/2 inch socket and use that instead of a 13mm in most places. It's not an exact match, but it's so close that for functional reasons it's fine. But in other cases, what you're doing is just risking rounding off nuts, bolts, fixings, and it's just not worth it. I'm just going to break away from the toolbox for a second because some of my things related to sockets are not in there, not much. But one of the things that is relevant to mention right now is one of these. So this is an impact gun or impact driver. Impact drivers of old used to look like enormous center punches with a square drive instead of a point. And you put a socket in the end, hold it on the nut, and then give it a right good whack on the end with a hammer, and it would try and inch nuts and bolts around. This is the sort of modern solution to it. And when they first came out, they were a little bit Mickey Mouse, or you spent a fortune to get one that actually worked. Nowadays, good brushless motors are common, good batteries are common, and an electric impact driver is a fabulous tool to have, to the extent that I no longer own a hammer-on impact driver. So what does this do? When you're trying to undo really, really stubborn nuts and bolts, or nuts and bolts that are done up very, very tight, sometimes you just can't apply enough leverage, or if you did apply enough leverage slowly, it would round the bolt off, it would snap something or shear it. Sometimes what you need after you've tried stuff like penetrant, maybe a little bit of heat, is impact. So sudden jolts of aggression that are going to cause the nut or bolt to undo. An impact driver, put one of my impact sockets on, there you go, will give you that. And this has got the power to undo really tight nuts and bolts. Mine is a 2 amp hour lithium ion battery connected to a brushless motor impact gun. And this one has 450 Newton meters of torque. It has a little variable setting down here, which is very useful. It essentially says how violent you want me to be, minimum to maximum. And because it's got that, I can actually use it for running up nuts and bolts, just using the speed of the gun rather than using the aggression of the gun. So I can put one of these, for instance, on a wheel nut, and it undoes the wheel nut. And you hear that bang, 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 that snapping action. That is a series of impacts rather than a smooth turn. If I squeeze gently, it turns slowly-ish and smoothly. As soon as it meets resistance, so I'm squeezing really gently, it starts making that bang, bang, bang. I'm not going to go any further because I know how tight my wheel nuts are going to be, and I will re-torque them up later. but that will break loose very stubborn nuts and bolts. Sometimes you can sit there with it going bang, 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 bang for 30 seconds, but the continued vibration really does help to shake things loose. Fabulous tool, plus nice and quick for removing lots and lots of nuts and bolts. Okay, let's start in the toolbox proper. And what you'll note is I've got these socket organisers. These are not just for pretty. I find them incredibly useful to be able to locate the right size quickly. Another method is to use this sort of thing, a socket rail. I find them quite handy to collect together a few sockets that I'm going to take underneath the car or under the bonnet and just plonk them on a rail, or to keep my sort of unusual or specialist items. But this is what I like for the majority of my tools. I have 1/4 inch drive, 3/8 drive and 1/2 inch drive sockets. The smaller drives, so by drive we mean the little square hole in the back, are useful because access is often better with these. So you're using lightweight extensions, lightweight ratchets, small tiny tools. You're not going to apply so much torque, and so they can be very handy. The 1/2 inch drive is a lot more substantial, and so are the extension bars, ratchets and tools you're going to use to attach to it. So access is not so good, but they're far better at applying higher torques. So it's not just a case of having, let's say, 3mm to 10mm in a 1/4 inch set, 10mm to 13 in the 3/8, and everything above in that. There's a degree of that, but there's also a lot of overlap. So here we've got a 13mm 1/4 inch drive, a 13mm 3/8 drive, and a 13mm 1/2 inch drive. And you might want to use a different one depending on the application, and the first thing you're going to notice is this one has very thin walls. It's not meant for as much torque because of the 1/4 inch drive, but because of that it can be made quite light, thin, and can maybe access bolts, but this one is just too chunky to get into. It's actually quite a nice socket. It's been slimmed down, but it's still considerably more chunky than this one. This one, if you apply too much torque, it will split, and it will split quite easily. This one, less so. And of course, that's Mommy Bear in the middle. Another thing to look at is the throat depth, the distance inside the tool to which a threaded bolt can sit. So if I just take this extension, you can see this is quite shallow, and that's necessarily so because at some point it's got to change from being a socket to a drive. So I can't even get the whole of the square section of this extension in there. So if you've got a long threaded bolt sticking through a nut, you're going to struggle to get on with that. Then you go up to the next size, you can lose the whole of the square drive, and on the largest you've got a lot more space to play with. There comes a point which maybe that is not deep enough still for your needs. You need to get on a nut that has a bolt sticking a long way through it, and that just can't get on. And that's where we bring in our additional flavour, which is long series sockets. And a long series socket is a version of, in this case, this 3/8 socket, which is the same in every respect, except it is much, much deeper. So you can have a long threaded bolt and still reach the nut on the other end of it. And sometimes they're just useful for reaching. Rather than put a small extension on your ratchet, use a long series socket. Now I'll declare right now that I do have some other sockets and I keep them in a bucket on a bench. It's just my swapsies and extras and things like that. I keep in this drawer the things I actually use. So what you'll see is, for instance, I don't have a lot of long series sockets. I have the ones which I use a lot. And where I'm going to use something a lot, I buy them individually in nice quality because the length can weaken them. So there we have an 8mm long series socket, and that's brilliant for instruments. I find a lot of instruments have 8mm nuts and bolts on and have quite long threaded sections, or I just need a little bit of access to get around wiring and things like that. So I really do get some good use out of this one, and hence it's a good brand. It's a Teng. And the way I use these racks is, here's my full set, and behind it I have anything different or equivalent. By contrast, the sockets on the front edge are mainly no brand stuff, particularly on the small sizes, because you don't put a lot of torque on those. So what I've got is great, and if I break them, I get a new one. And when I get a new one, I replace it with something nicer. And so, much like I explained in my screwdriver descriptions, I'd actually enjoy letting my tool set evolve, and it means I can pick brands. I don't have to always have the Teng tool or the Sykes Pick-a-Van, or insert your own phrase here. Certainly not the snap-on, where I've got to spend a fortune and therefore will resist getting the right tools. I have a nice selection. There's another variation that it's worth talking about. This is a 12-pointer or multi-spline socket. You notice it's got that sort of cookie cutter crinkled edge. If I pick up a larger one, it's probably easier to see it. There we go. Now, the advantage of these multi-spline or 12-point sockets and spanners is when you put it on the nut, it goes on there. Now, if access is not good, you can rotate it just 1/12 of a turn, and you've got another way of putting it on. 1/12 of a turn, another way of putting it on. So they are easy for access, easy for engagement. That's great. However, the amount of contact that you're driving this with is greatly reduced. You're really just pinching the corners and turning them with that. So your risk of rounding off a bolt is higher with a 12-point socket. If we switch to a full form or 6-sided socket, what you'll see is we can only engage the bolt every 1/6 of a turn, so a little more tricky to get in place. Less so with a ratchet, because you can always rotate the socket, but certainly with a spanner. But the engagement is all the way around, and as long as it's a good fit, that gives you a lot less chance of rounding off a nut. So again, there are reasons to have both, and I have a selection